Oh, hello, Kimera Hashiv and Jewish Mr. Joseph and Analaba. Hi, I'm Joseph in Scotland, and today's Gaelic word we're going to look at is she. It has a little accent on the top there, so that's really important if you're writing it, because if you don't, this word takes on a different meaning. Without that little accent, the word means stride, or to walk fast, and will sound something like she, but will have a G sound at the end, shig or she. And if you say it fast, it sounds the same. So always remember the accent. She. It has two meanings in Gaelic. One is peace, and one is fairy. Now, you may have heard the word for peace before, because if you go to Ireland, if you're walking around the southern parts, in Dublin, for example, in the Republic, the police are called Garda Síochána or Síochána. So, as you know, Irish is still a thing for the Irish people, but in Scotland, it's also a thing as well. The other meaning of the word is fairy. Now, it seems a bit strange that it can mean fairy or peace, and it kind of implies that fairies were peaceful people or were bringers of peace, but that's not the case. Fairies, particularly in the Gaelic world, were not beings to be trusted. They were kind of like the Arabic jinn, the genie in the lamp story, where the genie does what you want, but there's always a catch. It's kind of like that. So the fairies weren't like the anglicized version, Tinkerbell and Peter Pan and little bottom of the garden style fairies. In fact, quite the opposite. They were big, aggressive, often women with one nostril, and they were so big that you could sit on their knee. The Scottish fairies were particularly fond of babies, presumably because they didn't have much success in having any of their own. At least that's what some people say. So they loved kidnapping real human babies to raise as their own. If you want to know more about Gaelic fairies, there's a few really good books available. You've heard me promoting Ronald Black's book, The Gaelic Otherworld. He goes into fairies in a big way. There's also I think, Cradle to the Grave by Margaret Bennett is another good book. She talks a lot about customs involving the fairies. And I've just written one example here of the Banshee, the fairy woman. And all across at least lowland Scotland, the Banshee was the one who came to tell you about death. She was usually a very ugly woman who was howling at the window. She was crying. And the belief is that she's an ancient member of your tribe. Perhaps if you have a Scottish surname, or you have Scottish roots, or if your mother was Scottish or whatever. My grandparents, both my grandmothers, were big believers, but they were from Irish descent, and I think they brought it with them from Northern Ireland. So the Lowlands, because of Irish immigration, they were very into their banshees. In the Gaelic world generally, there's a number of beings associated with news about death. The Banshee is one of them, and the Banshee's been glamorized by Hollywood now, so I'm sure you've seen movies about her. Sometimes she's very beautiful, and other times she's very ugly. So here we have it, she, meaning peace, and meaning fairy. And yeah, these these two words are only connected because of nature. Apparently, the word she um, was originally a word which meant the fairy mound, the places where the fairies lived, the fairy mounds. And these were thought to be otherworld places, places where you could be transported. Um, and because of that, the word became associated with peace, tranquility, um, and over time, it took on a meaning for both of these. Okay, so it's not because the fairy was peaceful, it's because of the place where the fairy lived. That's my understanding anyway. But yeah, don't think of these two words as being related in terms of fairies being peaceful, because it's really not the case. As I mentioned earlier, it's more like the Arabic Aladdin in the lamp style genie. They weren't to be trusted. They brought illness. They could shoot you with their fairy arrows to give you sickness, and people who had the second sight were considered to have had fairy lovers. So there's always a benefit, but there's always suffering in any interaction you have with them. And you can read more about those in books that I've mentioned previously. The Gaelic Otherworld, Ronald Black. Also, I think Margaret Bennett does some wonderful publications. One of them, The Cradle to the Grave, and you can read about how children were protected from fairies and these kind of traditions. Right, so let's move on, because we want to talk about how to use the word. So as a kind of invocation of peace, you can say, and I've written it here, Biag Shilat. Now you recognize this lat, tapalat or tapalet, meaning thank you. Okay, so you know about this already. Tapalet being the informal way when you're saying thank you. You're really saying thanks be with you. So in this case, we're saying peace be with you. Okay, so Biag Shilat. You say it fast. Big Shilat. It sounds like Bishilat, doesn't it? And I've just written here as well the equivalent for me. And I've written that because, as you know from other video clips, in Gaelic you don't own anything. Everything is at you, with you, or on you. And it's the same here with peace. This is a very informal way to say peace be with you if you're talking to your friends. You remember there's other ways to make it much more formal. You can go back and check my other clips for that. The same with Kimera Hashiv, Kimera Hau. Kimera Hashiv is the very polite way to say you, for example. Kimera Hau is the informal way. So there's always both. Sure, you can guess what the really formal way is here. If you think of tapalat or tapalet, whatever way you choose to say it, the ultra formal way, of course, is tapaliv or tapalav. So here, if you wanted to make this super formal, you wouldn't say biag shilat, you could say biag shiliv or shilav. Okay, so that shouldn't be new for you. You can go back and check in my earlier video clips. Yeah, you also have known for me there as well. Right, so just to give you some background to this, so Uh, Beag is a subjunctive form of the verb to be, used in blessings or wishes, or if you want to invoke peace. Obviously, you can change the grammar if you want to say something like peace be the world or peace be with your heart or something like that. You can change that if you're looking for uh, some kind of invocation, which, as you know, is really very common in the Gaelic world. Right, let's move on. My next example here, Hamiagiri, she. And in Gaelic, Hamiagiri, I'm wanting. Some people say Hamiagiri, Hamiagiri. I was always taught to use the same as the English word eerie, strange. Hamiagiri, she. I am wanting peace, or I want peace. Hamiagiri, she. Iri is wanting or seeking. There's no lenition. The lenition is that really, really scary um, uh, Gaelic thing where you put an H in after the first letter, like Mary becomes Vary, Fane becomes Hain, and she would become he, but it's not applicable in my examples here. Lenition is very complicated, so you can look in your grammar book for that. So let's just go over what we have so far then. She, it can mean peace and it can mean fairy, but that doesn't mean that fairies are peaceful, not even slightly. It's just more to do with the etymology of the word. Banshee is fairy woman, not peaceful woman. Well, not peaceful fairy woman anyway. Here, Beag Shilat, or Beag Shilet, depending how you say it, a clue is another word that you probably know already, which is tapalet or tapalat for saying thank you. I've heard let and lat for that. And you can make your own invocation once you know the construction. Remember in Gaelic, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have things, everything is on you, at you, with you. The psychology is very different. Be careful when you're using this phonetic guide. At a first glance, it looks the same as the Gaelic word for little, which is beck, but this isn't beck at all. Okay, this is something else completely. Big, shilat. We mentioned already, this is used in blessings and wishes. There's a formal and informal way of doing it. And then my last example was Hami Agirishi and wanting peace. World peace, peace in your heart. I think it's a wonderful invocation that you can use to bring about peace in your life. And that's it. All right. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll be back soon with more words. I do understand that posting things here is quite sporadic. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is really just to pick things up that you would actually want to read. And other reasons are just about finding things that I actually want to present to you. Words of a spiritual nature, such as peace and the rosary, etc., are all wonderful things which propagate peace. So I'm very happy to bring those when I can. All right, well, I'll be back again soon. And I'm just going to say bye for now. Chiri and Razda.